Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today doing another video, and the subject of today's video is going to be on the 2019 NBA Finals between the Warriors and the Raptors. Of course, as we all know, the Raptors did win the series in 6 games. It was a very exciting series, lots of good games. It was very entertaining in many ways. You had many emotional highs and lows. You had back and forth play. You had times when people thought the Warriors were going to sweep the series, i.e., game one. You had times when people thought the Raptors were going to run away with it, like after game four. You had times when people were saying Warriors in seven, like after game five. You had times when people were laughing and having fun. You had times where people were devastated, like when Kevin Durant went down or when Klay Thompson went down. You just had everything that you'd want in a final series, in my opinion. To me, it was just a roller coaster, and on any given night of any given game, you could think that the series was going in a completely different direction. And I think that it was just a very interesting series. And I just want to talk about basically some of the legacies that I think were drastically changed because of um, what went down between um, basically just what went down between these two teams, and how a lot of the uh, a lot of the perceptions of people are going to change um, based on how things happened. Like now, the Warriors are going to be perceived as a team that only won 3 titles instead of a 4-1. Um, that's a bigger difference than people think, honestly. And then a lot of the players individually and how their legacies will be changed based on this. So I think I'm going to talk about the Golden State side of things more, just because that's the less positive side, and then I'd like to finish more on the happy Toronto Raptors side. So for the Warriors, I've never really loved this Warriors dynasty. I know it's gonna sound like I'm one of those pretentious people that acts like they know something that other people don't or are cooler than other people, but I really like this Warriors team until Durant came, and I actually really liked them around 2012 to 13, and 2013 to 14 when they were under Mark Jackson. That's when I really enjoyed this team, and even 2014 to 15 before just everybody you knew was like, I'm a Warriors fan. I'm a Warriors fan. I liked them a lot back then when they just seemed like this young up and coming team that was exciting and fun, and nobody really held anything against them or was like, "Oh, you like the Warriors? I hate you for that," or just whatever sports fans are like. I liked them back then, and then once they became the predominant favorite, and they sort of got cocky during that 73 win season, I started to I started to brush off of them a bit, and then didn't really like them because everyone had hopped on the bandwagon. And so yes, I'm very typical fan in that way, that I hop off right when everyone hops on the bandwagon, and I say, "Oh well, I liked them before blah blah blah." Yes, I am like that, but I did legitimately like them a lot before everyone else liked them. And then as they got more cocky as a team, I backed off of them a little bit. But overall, I liked this finals actually because you got to see the Golden State Warriors back to basically the team that they were before Durant, of just a core of Clay, Steph, and Draymond and Iguodala, and I like that team a lot. And so um, I saw this finals and I thought, if you get Clay back healthy, let's say 2 years from now, because he won't really play next year, and you still got Steph and you still got Draymond, you don't need another big free agent. This team is a finals favorite and could have even won. If Clay doesn't go down, the Golden State Warriors could have easily won this finals. And for that reason, I think it's somewhat foolish that people keep saying that uh, like the Warriors needed Durant. Is that I don't think they really needed him, honestly. They if Clay would have been healthy, they could have won. They could have had a shot at winning this finals. But either way, I think that the Warriors overall, the reputations are going to be somewhat stained by this finals. I think that Clay or Steph Curry is going to be looked at as a guy who cannot carry a team to a championship because, or just a guy that's always going to need a lot of help because, you know, even when he had a 47-point game, I heard people saying it was one of the most meaningless 47-point games ever. Um, really, Clay was the man for this series. Clay was the one shooting really well. He was shooting 54% from the field and 59% from three, whereas Steph during this series shot 41% from the field and 34% from three. Um, As far as Draymond, I don't think anything regarding his legacy will change because he played pretty well. 13 points per game, 11 rebounds, 9 assists, 2 steals, 1 block. So he played well. And Clay won't have a tarnished legacy from this at all because he played really well and valiantly. Neither will Iguodala because he was playing injured. Honestly, same with DeMarcus Cousins because he was pretty banged up during this. And Kevon Looney will come out pretty unscathed just because he was injured as well, and nobody really expects anything of him. Quinn Cook actually played phenomenally during this series. I think he hit some really big shots in really key moments. Um, but I think that the big guy who's going to take a hit here, and Kevin Durant won't because people will see him as a martyr who got injured and people will feel devastated for him. But I see Steph Curry as being the guy who people really end up seeing as like that guy that couldn't really get it done on his own. So we rake over the coals guys like James Harden, Anthony Davis, Damian Lillard. Those guys a lot of times get really just laid into because their teams never get to the finals or even in some cases the conference finals. Um, those guys never have ever had anywhere even remotely near the supporting cast that Steph Curry has always had. Klay Thompson and Draymond, he's basically always had two All Stars by his side. Andre Iguodala, they added in 2013, who was still in his prime and was just 2 years ago an All Star at that point. Um, and then you don't really have to go into it besides that. Kevin Durant, of course. Andrew Bogut, a former number one overall pick, who's like an all defensive first team player at points in his career. Um, Sean Livingston, really good guy off the bench. They've always had like a really deep team, and just they've always had such good supporting cast for Steph. But I think this series was really more of a like Steph. You don't have the God team now. You just have a really good team. What can you do with it? And it showed that he kind of comes up short when he's looked at as the sole guy without a running mate who is an all-star scorer next to him. Yes, Draymond's an all-star, but not an all-star scorer, more of an all-star defender type. And yeah, so Steph just underwhelmed a little bit. He scored 31 points per game for the series, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, but he did play 42 minutes a night, so those are a little bit inflated for how good how efficiently he scored. He also averaged like 22 shots per game, so that doesn't necessarily mean he was all that efficient in my opinion, but um, that's pretty clear from the 41% from the field, 34% from three. So I think as far as negativity, Steph is going to take the biggest hit here in this series. But now let's get to the more positive side because I feel like there's a lot more positive legacy changes rather than negative. And even Steph, he's still going to be remembered as a three-time champ, but he will definitely, if they never win a title again, he'll be remembered as the three-time champ who never had a Finals MVP. But over to the Warriors, over to the Raptors. Kawhi Leonard definitely hugely improved his legacy in this series. He could be considered the best player in the NBA right now, really, based on his performance just in the playoffs overall. In the finals, he shot 43% from the field, 36% from three, 91% from the free throw line, all pretty good numbers. Um, Efficiency a little bit lower than in the past, but the free throw shooting was very clutch and very good. He scored 29 points per game, 10 rebounds per game, 4 assists, 2 steals, 1 block. So really good numbers all around. He becomes one of him and 2 other players all time who have been finals MVPs on multiple teams, and that is him, LeBron, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So I think he definitely elevates himself to a level where he's going to be considered like a top 50 player of all time, just based off of this playoff run, honestly. And I think him winning Finals MVP and just them winning the Finals really changes his perception. A lot of people were saying last year when he was sitting out all year, he's not a leader, he's not a good team player. I think he's kind of proven all of that wrong with this series and these playoffs. Next guy who gets drastically changed as far as perception, Kyle Lowry, his perception as an NBA player will be looked at much differently from now on. I think before he was sort of seen as this perpetual choker and just a dude who's basically always going to let you down in the playoffs. And now, 26 points in Game 6, sort of being the MVP of that game, probably the best player on the floor for that game. He shot decent in the finals, 43% from the field, 37% from three, 79% from the line. 16 points, 7 assists per game, 2 steals per game. He was clutch in a lot of moments where they needed him to be clutch, and I think his status really changes. I think he goes from a guy who is going to be remembered as just like a good player to now being remembered as like Chauncey Billups. I think he is now basically, as far as legacy, I think he's on the same level as a Chauncey Billups. Um, Not a Finals MVP, no, but basically a really a key cog on a Finals team. He's a five-time All-Star and now an NBA champ, and that's what Chauncey Billups was. The only accolade missing between the two is that Chauncey had a Finals MVP, but still Lowry, I think Lowry in this series basically went from being remembered as a really good player to now he could potentially be a Hall of Famer. And probably honestly, if he makes like another 1 to 2 All-Star teams, he will be a Hall of Famer. And that's crazy to think that just basically because of this one ring, he will go from like just considered a really good player to a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. Next, I think as far as a big legacy improvement, you get Marc Gasol, a guy who a three-time All-Star, a Defensive Player of the Year, and internationally a really good player. A guy who was maybe gonna make the Hall of Fame before this, just based on being an international player, much like how Manu is gonna make the Hall of Fame, basically just on being a good international player. Now I think it's essentially cinched that Marc Gasol will be a Hall of Famer. Really, it's crazy to think, but just between him being a multiple-time All-Star, him being a Defensive Player of the Year, overseas a great player, and now a key cog on an NBA champion, I think that really solidifies him as a Hall of Famer, which is crazy. Whereas I think beforehand it was like 50-50 shot, but now I think it's pretty much a cinch. So I think his legacy definitely improves tremendously from being on this team. Pascal Siakam, the guy who's probably going to win defensive or excuse me, most improved player of the year. I think this vaults him, and a lot of people saw this year that he really is an all-star caliber player, and I think he will be sort of like a perennial all-star for years to come. I think this year this championship will have the effect that it had on like Rip Hamilton on the '04 Pistons. I know I'm making a bunch of comparisons between this team and the '04 Pistons, but there are sort of quite a few in my opinion, just because of a few different things, but I think Pascal is going to be now seen as a guy who really should have been an all-star before this even, and like Rip Hamilton, he will make a few after this just because he got a lot of notoriety from being in this series. Danny Green and Serge Ibaka and Fred Van Fleet for that reason. Three role players who will be seen now for Danny Green, a guy who will be seen as not just a one-time champ who happened to be on a good team, but a guy who can regularly contribute to a title contending team. Serge Ibaka is going to go from a guy that's going to be remembered as just basically like a good role player to now like a good role player on a championship team. And just for reference, that's basically the difference between I'm trying to think of like what a good example of a guy who never won a title but was a good role player was. Like a Cedric Ceballos. That's like a guy who was a really good role player on some good teams, but just never won a championship. It's the difference between being remembered like that or being remembered like Tony Kukoc or like a Lamar Odom, like a player who was really key and a really good role player, but just happened to be on a championship team and have that really cool title to their name. And now Serge Ibaka is going to be remembered more in that really good light of like the Kukocs, the Lamar Odoms, like a really good six man on a championship team rather than a guy who sort of gets forgotten in time, like a Cedric Ceballos, or to me, another one would be like a Nick Van Exel, like a really good player, just never was an all star, really, never on a championship team, but just like a really solid starter or rotational piece. Fred Van Fleet, um, a guy who, again, same sort of thing, like a rotational guy. He's going to be remembered as basically the JJ Barea of this team, like how JJ was remembered on the 2011 Mavericks. Just like a really cool spark plug and a really good player and really coming up clutch when his team needs him. And then the last guy I want to talk about here who really didn't play at all but got a ring out of all this, but it really will drastically improve his legacy will be Jeremy Lin, who really didn't have much playing time on this team at all, only appeared in 1 minute of one game of this series, but he gets a title. And now Linsanity isn't just this fun story from 7 years ago. It's a guy who now can boast that he's an NBA champion. And really, I think that he's a guy who doesn't get enough shots in the league, but he is a good player. And I just like a guy that I've always cheered for. And I'm just happy to see that he also can say he's an NBA champion now. And I think that drastically changes his legacy and really does wonders for the community overseas in Asia overall, just having a great role model in Jeremy Lin to look up to, and he can now say he's an NBA champ and just continue to inspire many people to pursue their dreams and love basketball. So that's it, guys. That's all I have to say about the legacies that were impacted by this series. I think it's a monumental series as far as it's going to definitely mark a shift in the NBA. We're going from the 2000 teens to now the 2020s, and things are going to be different, and legacies have changed. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to leave comments below. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have a good day. Bye.